Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Jansky, Director of Programming for the City Club of Cleveland. It's my pleasure to introduce today's panel discussion on the effects of trauma on a child's ability to learn. A recent Washington Post article stated that, for the first time in at least 50 years, a majority of U.S. public school students come from low-income families. This information comes from a new analysis of 2013 federal data. Furthermore, the Southern Education Foundation reports that 51% of students in pre-kindergarten through 12th grade in the 2012 to 2013 school year were eligible for the federal program that provides free and reduced-price lunches. Political leaders, elected officials, and education reformers continue to try and come up with ideas to improve our educational outcomes, since we are still falling way behind other countries. What they're all missing, unfortunately, is the real reason that many of our children in public education are not reaching their fullest potential. In order to learn, students must be ready to learn. Schools do their best at attempting to compensate for whatever a child may be lacking. Clothes are readily available to students who need them, parenting courses are offered, and breakfast and lunch programs feed hungry children. Conflict management interventions, peer tutoring, after-school workshops on test-taking strategies, and many other well-meaning programs are executed with stretched budgets to improve student performance. However, schools are failing to acknowledge the role that stress and trauma plays in a student's ability to learn, especially those students who live in impoverished settings. Barbara Oehlberg, a member of our panel today, states the following in her book, Reaching and Teaching Stress and Anxious Learners. The organic effects on brain development of a child's experience involving insecurity, loss, fear, or lack of safety can impair cognitive processing and impede learning. Today, you will learn about how classroom teachers can meet the learning needs of these anxious and stressed students. Our moderator today is Mittie Davis Jones, Associate Professor at the Maxine, Goodman, Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. Dr. Jones has been a practitioner, student, and researcher in the field of urban affairs for more than 35 years. Her previous work experience includes positions in city planning, public housing management, and housing program development. She holds a Ph.D. in political science and a Master of Urban Planning from Wayne State University. Dr. Jones, I turn the panel over to you to introduce our esteemed panel.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Okay, to my immediate left is Mallory Floyd. Mallory is formerly principal of the Belden Elementary School in Canton City School District, and she was the principal during the Grow the Brain project, which we will be discussing today. She is currently the assistant superintendent of the Canton local school system. Next is, Meryl Johnson. Meryl is retired, in quotes, middle and high school teacher with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, who I see everywhere that I am, so I'm not sure that retired aptly describes her status at this point. Next to her is another so-called retiree, Barbara Oehlberg. Barbara is an education and child trauma consultant. She's the author of books and book chapters on the issue of trauma. And her research, which she will talk about today, centers around the issue of neuroscience and the impact of the nervous system and the brain on behavioral and learning issues. And at the end of the panel row here, we have Jonathan Shaw. Jonathan was a kindergarten teacher at Belden Elementary School in the Canton City School District, where the Grow the Brain project was conducted. He is now a third grade teacher at Mason Elementary School, which is also in the Canton City School District. So it's been stated already the importance of education in our society. We know that children are our future and our promise. And we know how much time children spend in school. And in the course of a day, probably more time there than any place else, other than school, so I guess during summer vacation. Our children are faced with many issues, some of which impact their performance in school. They bring those issues into school, and the teachers and administrators are expected to address those issues because they kind of all merge in the classroom. But the primary role of the academic institution is to promote social, emotional, and academic development. So the challenge for those who must meet those needs is to do so effectively in light of some of the challenges that and the issues that they may face that students bring uniquely into the classroom. So there have been many approaches to how to reform school systems to make them more effective. running the gamut from school-based management to mayoral governance, which we are familiar with here. One researcher that I'm familiar with calls the various efforts at reforming schools and education spinning wheels because of all of the efforts that have been tried. But today we have a panel that will discuss a program which is based on the work of Barbara Oehlberg, who I have known for maybe a couple of decades now or so. Barbara is an author, a teacher, an advocate, and a consultant, and is very persistent in trying to get the message out about the work that she is doing. So we'd like to thank Meryl and others who had a role in getting this panel pulled together today. So Barbara, would you please give us some background on why we're here today?
All right, thank you very much. And as Mittie said, our topic today, I'm titling Trauma-Informed Education, which is based on neuroscience. And it affords classroom teachers the opportunity to build children's brains and strengthen their self-regulation. Now, I realize teachers are not clinicians, neither do we want to be, but classroom teachers have an incredible opportunity to grow the brains of the children in their classroom, increase achievement, strengthen resiliency, and social mobility. In the last decade, the topic of attachment, which most of you I'm sure have heard about, the topic of infant attachment has become a key research issue because attachment is now directly correlated to brain development, and it begins in early infancy. It also determines the child's lifetime capacity for self-regulation, for stress management, and empathy. And that's according to Alan Shore, who claims that the beginnings of this brain capacity starts 8 to 18 weeks after birth. Now, many of you here probably are parents. We didn't have this information when we raised our children, but we have it now. And I think it's vitally important that it be integrated into educational programs. Between 8 and 18 weeks, the child lays down the scaffolding for their future lifetime capacity, as I said, for stress management, self-regulation, and empathy. It is a subject of deep scrutiny right now because it's been determined that the adult care providers or parents cannot attach to their infant if they did not achieve full attachment when they were a child. And that means the number of children with weak attachments is growing from generation to generation. Weak attachments cause developmental trauma, which means it has the potential to impact them their entire life, but it does not have to be a life sentence if teachers are informed of the neuroscience of brain development. Fortunately, the human brain is marvelously, has a marvelous capacity of plasticity. And Louis Cozzolino, and he writes books incessantly from Harvard, claims that all classroom teachers are automatically neuroscientists when we stimulate brain growth in children, and that this can be done at any age. So there isn't that cutoff age where it isn't worth it. Cozzolini of Harvard has integrated neuroscience into educational policy. His newest book is Attachment-Based Teaching in 2014. The book validates trauma-informed education and makes it the claim that classroom teachers can heal a weak attachment. Now that's pretty phenomenal news. And I don't think any of us have really thought of ourselves in that capacity, but that we automatically grow their brains. Probably many of you can recall the articles last spring claimed that many 4- and 5-year-olds in America were being suspended from school because of behavioral issues. Now, I'm making an assumption, but I assume those behaviors were interpreted as being willful defiance, when in actuality they were stress and fear-related behaviors. Think of what that means to a child at beginning 12 years of school to be suspended. Children who have experienced weak attachments do not have the neural networks to be self-regulated. They are not doing this by choice, okay? It is not a lack of moral character. They lack the networks essential for self-regulation. They often are in a state of insecurity, and this fear triggers these explosive, sudden reactions from children that are misinterpreted as, and we all know this from our childhoods, misbehaviors. And they are really brain-oriented. This is not generally considered radical attachment deficits for some of you who are familiar with that. Being fearful is not a character flaw in anxious children, but it does shut down learning. And that's why we're talking about it today. It's very discouraging to learn that preschoolers are still expected to come to school ready to behave and to express their needs in words. And that is absolutely untrue for anxious children, because when they're scared, their ability to use words is turned off because they're operating out of a different area of their brain. So how can we promote this in the educational field? Usually the behaviors are seen as misbehaviors. As I see it, it is a grave injustice to children that educators and teachers have been denied neuroscience brain development information. And that would be at all levels. Not only do I hope that colleges and universities who train teachers, but also staff development programs include neuroscience in every presentation. Also, anxious students cannot cope with threats, verbal threats, both real and perceived. The threats generate additional fear, and they automatically downshift out of their thinking brain, the neocortex, into the limbic brain, which is deep inside the brain and is there for emotional determination. Teachers cannot teach the limbic brain because it doesn't hear words or process words. So the longer the child is in a state of fear, the less they are capable of learning, not because they don't have the genetic ability to learn, but because it hasn't been presented in a way that they can process it. In fact, Bruce D. Perry, who has been my hero for 20 years, claims that many children hear approximately 50% of the words their teachers say on any given day because of anxiety. So by the time they're in 3rd grade, they're already so far behind. And it is not the teacher's fault or the child's fault. We need a different system. Neither can children who have witnessed or observed trauma deal constructively with standard school discipline. This is probably the toughest part of trauma-informed education, because the discipline, they interpret discipline to be yet another rejection, and it turns off their ability to learn. Now, a form of discipline that does help is restorative discipline. Trauma-informed education is not ignoring children's behaviors in the classroom. It's just that in trauma-informed education, we focus on providing emotional security, predictable teachers and trusting, respectful teaching. And the goal of this is to assure that children spend the greatest amount of time in their thinking brain, in the neocortex, as opposed to the limbic system. Because a teacher cannot teach the limbic system, okay? And that is so essential for their achievement. Restorative discipline is less threatening because it doesn't focus on rules broken. It focuses on the harm done, and it is not as shaming to children. It encourages addressing the root causes of the behaviors as opposed to reacting to the symptoms of the behaviors. So adults will have to change, to let go of our notion that children have to feel the consequences of their behaviors in order to change those that aren't acceptable. We're the ones who have to change. And we do that by designing ways that will permit us to reach and teach all children. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Mallory, I understand that your school implemented a program based on some of Barbara's research. Can you tell us about how that was established and what your role was in that?
Absolutely. At the time, I was a principal of a building of about 340 students, pre-K to 5th grade. And there were a lot of emotional things going on with the kids. We saw a lot of discipline incidents within the community, within the schoolhouse. A lot of people made assumptions. We were 94% poverty in our building, and we were just looking for a way to do things differently when we were introduced to Barbara. One of my favorite quotes I'd like to read real quick to you is, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always got, and you'll keep feeling the way you've always felt. So we knew we needed to do something different, and I think there were multiple strategies that we incorporated into our school day, but 3 of them I wanted to make sure that I shared with all of you today. The first one being, we made significant changes in the classroom environment. As Barbara alluded to, we changed how we disciplined our students, and I believe some of that was already going on, but after her training, it made a huge difference in how we approach things. And then I'll share with you a little bit about how we enhanced the relationships we had with our kids and ultimately with each other as a staff. Barbara came in. We were looking for volunteers because we believed everyone couldn't do this. And as she said, if you are an adult that didn't have that attachment, you really couldn't understand changing your teaching, what that would do for your students and ultimately for how you're teaching and the achievement levels. So I was able to get 4 teachers to volunteer, K2, 4, and 5, I believe. And we went through 12 hours of training on a Saturday, broke it down into small chunks so that we made sure we were getting everything we needed to, because she did really present a lot of information. And it was just interesting to see the light bulbs go on within the room. Because again, you make assumptions when you see a kid act out, well, that's bad behavior. Or, you know, some people would say, well, that's a bad kid. No, they're reacting to some things that we don't even know have gone on in their lives. Discipline-wise, and I think this was probably the biggest struggle for the teachers that weren't part of the program. To be honest, it was a big struggle for some of the support staff. And I'm thinking of a couple of cafeteria workers. And it was also a struggle for the parents, because we've been raised that when you do something wrong, you're punished. So if you do something wrong in school, that parent, that support staff, some of the teachers expected me to kick them out of school, where we had to refocus our words and get the kid to realize what was done, realize what was wrong, and begin that process of teaching. If it would happen again, or if we could rewind time, what would you do differently? The other thing I'd like to share, in each classroom, we changed the environment after our training with Barbara, and we realized that we had to have a safety zone in the classroom. And as we were moving through this process, the thought was we had a section in the room with a beanbag, and we were teaching the kids before they lost control, before they did something that would get them in trouble, that they could go to that safe place and have a seat in that beanbag and just kind of de-stress and use stress balls. Another thing we learned from Barbara was how important water is and how much hydration kids need to stay in that thinking brain. So we quickly went out and got pitchers and kept water and cups in the classroom for the kids to partake at any time. And then the third thing we instituted, that all of the classes at least once a week had to have a class meeting. And during that class meeting was a lot of the activities that Barbara talked about in her book to make those networks reattach and to form those relationships with the kids. It gave them a way to reflect and process some of the things that were going on that we didn't know were going on that could have been causing that behavior. So that was real important. And I have to brag for a minute about, because I had great teachers at Belden, and I felt like they were even greater after we had some knowledge of where things were coming from. So Barbara would come down to Canton every other week after we had trained everyone, the program was underway, and I truly believe on start on time with the meeting and end on time. And almost every meeting that we had every 2 weeks never ended on time because people wanted to keep talking and reflecting and thinking and sharing things that were working well in their classroom. It was definitely not an overnight problem solver for the building, but we definitely saw growth in the kids, growth in the adults, and ultimately growth in their achievement.
Okay. How long did the program last there?
We started in January and ended at the end of the school year, and then tried to recruit more teachers to make the program a little bit bigger. But after that second year, I had chose to go on to a different position. Okay. And I don't believe a lot of it formally was continued once I left, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, we were talking earlier. You were one of the teachers who participated in the training, and you mentioned that you had graduated from Kent State, but that this type of learning was not incorporated in your curriculum there. So how did you become involved and interested in pursuing the trauma-based education?
Well, at Kent State, we had a lot of social and emotional development courses, and just my philosophies on education are not as mainstream as you find. I went over to Italy and did some studying in Italy. Some educators from observed educators over there, and I kind of brought that experience back into my teaching, and.
He was ahead of his time. That's what.
Yeah, I really don't know how to explain how I came to be teaching this way. I guess when you see the faces of your students and you see the devastation or the sadness, you just something in you has to change, and you have to meet the needs of your students. So, Barbara says that I started this long before she even came down. So, I guess it was just my approach of being with the children that lent itself to this program.
Tell a little bit about the class meetings you had to help the class understand some of the really, really stressed kids in your room.
Well, I prepared 3 stories to tell you today because I thought we were going to be standing at the podium. So, and these are my notes.
You're safe. You're safe.
Okay.
They're all smiling.
You can still use your notes.
Yeah, well, I know the stories.
Okay.
The first story I was going to share with you actually had to involve rules and rule making in our classroom. And I always start the class year off by asking the students, what kind of year do you want? What kind of school year, what kind of life do you want to have in the building? And so we usually start with setting the ground rules for behaving in the classroom. And it's interesting, every single year, the rule list starts no running, no hitting, no spitting, no kicking, no foul words, no this, no that. Every single rule had no whatever. And I had a student in my classroom, and we were talking about this on the way up, who would destroy my classroom every day for 2 months. Like starting in August all the way up to the middle of October, he would wreck some part of the classroom. And it was actually this student who gave us a shift in thinking during our classroom meetings about our rules. And it was one day we were in the morning meeting, and he says, Mr. Shaw, every single one of your rules has no. We don't have a single rule that tells us what to do in this classroom. And so that led a week or two conversation during our morning meetings, like, okay, you're right. I'll call him Seth. Seth, you're right. All these rules are negative. We don't have a single positive rule. What can we do to fix this? And so for 2 weeks, we talked about how we should be, how we should act. And at the end of the 2 weeks during our morning meeting, we came back, we ripped up our old rules, and we said, let's start new. And so the first one, be polite. Second one, be kind. Listen to each other. So we just started from shifting from not what to, or what not to do to what you shouldn't do, what is expected of you. And it really was this paradigm shift in the classroom where, you know, most of those students throughout the day, anywhere they are in the building, they had those no rules. You're not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be this way. You're not supposed to be that way. We don't want you this way. We don't want you that way. And in our classroom, it shifted from we don't want you to we do want you and you can do better. So the students stopped thinking of themselves as constantly breaking the rules or doing things they shouldn't be doing, as moving over to doing things they should be doing, working on how to become a better student, how to become a better listener, how to become a better friend. So that's the way we started in the classroom.
Okay. So are you able to incorporate these things in your new school?
In our new school, we still have classroom meetings. We still talk about problems. It's a little faster paced in third grade.
No.
Third grade guarantees, so you got to hit the ground running. But we still incorporate it. So.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That was very interesting. Meryl, can you tell us, from your perspective, having been in the Cleveland school system, the relevance of this research and how you've maybe seen some of the issues play out?
Yes. Well, first, it's wonderful to be here. Barbara, I've known Barbara for a long time, and one of the things that we always talked about was how it's so important for students to feel safe in the classroom and for them to be able to be in touch with what's going on. And so I decided I incorporate writing into getting them to really think about what's going on in their lives. And so one of the things that I think was really successful, I would use journal topics. And it's funny, the journal topics that I would use would be topics that would get the students to really reflect on their own lives, as opposed to generic, you know, how was your weekend and that kind of thing. And I told Barbara that when I retired, I went back to the school to visit, and one of the students said, Ms. Johnson, we wish you were still here because the teacher we have now makes us write every day. And I said, well, I made you write every day. And he said, yeah, but your topics were better. and so I just thought that was a really welcoming comment from a student. One of the topics that I gave them was a four-letter word called hope. And I asked them, what gives you hope? And I just wanted to very quickly share some of their responses with you. These were 8th graders. They said, when my grandma was sick in the hospital for 3 days and came home with a smile on her face, ready to play poker. Another child said, getting ready for church with the sun shining on me. Another one said, watching a young man help an old woman struggling with her groceries. Another child said, seeing poor children get helped by wealthy people. My dad's strong arms wrapped around me when I need a shoulder to cry on. Hearing the pastor say, everything is going to be okay. The high-pitched laugh of my newborn baby brother. Seeing a drug addict go into rehab. Seeing the bright moon shining in the corner of my window every night. The fresh scent of new tennis shoes. Strolling through my urban area, seeing that my neighborhood is gang-free. The warmth of a blanket when I'm cold. And that one made me think of, in the Cleveland district, I just looked it up, last year there were 3,600 homeless children in the Cleveland School District. And so when you think about the loss and the insecurity and the fear and so forth that they're bringing with them, this kind of trauma-informed education is so important. The thought of my mother's bright face as I walk across the stage at high school graduation. Seeing my grandmom work in the fruit fields without her painkillers. Not getting robbed again when I was walking home Saturday night. The lovely poems and stories of Maya Angelou that let me be glad about who I am, no matter what people say. Reading Martin Luther King's speech, having hot and cold water to use every day, having my dad concerned with my education, having good teachers. And the last one I'm going to share with you, knowing if I leave it up to God, everything will be okay. And so those were 8th graders. Something else that I did, I find that young people who come to school with trauma and so forth, they have trouble being empathetic because everything is so horrible, and they have a hard time stepping into somebody else's shoes because their shoes are just so terrible, so everything is so horrible. So I remember, and I brought visual aids being a teacher. But back years ago, there was an article in the Plain Dealer, and the headline was Ohio's youngest prisoner, and it was a 14-year-old who was being sent to prison. And so I thought about how could I get my young people to relate to that, because so many young people have, mothers or fathers or cousins or siblings who are in prison. And so what I did was I decided, the article dealt with how the mom had done everything she could. She had, a lot of times people say, well, parents do the best they can. And she had put him in all kinds of agencies to try to help and so forth, and he still ended up being involved in an armed robbery. And so with most of my students being in the age of 14, I decided to have them write letters to the mother. I called the Plain Dealer and asked if I sent the letters to the reporter at the Plain Dealer, would the reporter forward the letters to the mother? And the person I spoke to said yes. And so the mother, I'm going to close with this, the mother sent a card, and this is from 1998 when this happened. And I kept the card because it was so moving. And I just want to share the card with you. She said, "Dear Mrs. Johnson, I received your letters along with your students." I wrote a letter also. She said, "I received your letter along with your students. I read each letter over and over. It really touched me and my family. Each one of your letters was like a big warm hug from each and every one of you. It lets me know that kids like every one of you can turn out to be fine adults. I sent a copy of every letter to Donzel. He understands what he did was wrong and that now he has to do the time. It's hard for all of us, but with God's help, we will get through this. I want to thank each and every one of you and your teacher. May God bless her for taking the time to make my life a little brighter. May God bless and keep each one of you in his loving care. Thanks ever so much. Sincerely, Mrs. S. Thompson." And so I just wanted to share the very last thing that really deals with writing is I use Dear Abby letters a lot. And if you're a fan of Dear Abby, you know that many times teenagers will write about various issues they're having. And so I make enough copies for every student, and I have them in the correct letter format with a topic, sentence, and everything. I have them become Dear Abby, and they have to respond to the person, and then they read their answers out loud, and we talk about it. And so imagine the students in that classroom who may be experiencing the pregnancy or the bullying or the father beating the mother, letters that appear in Dear Abby, who will get all kinds of different solutions or advice from their peers through sharing their answers from the letters. So those are just some of the things, some of the ways that I incorporate writing into, I guess, trauma-informed education and helping my students feel safe in the classroom.
Oh, thank you. Very interesting, and shows how caring can carry over to other folks.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying a panel discussion on boosting the achievement of anxious students, featuring Mallory Floyd, principal of Belden Elementary School of the Canton City School District, Meryl Johnson, retired middle and high school teacher from the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, Jonathan Shaw, kindergarten teacher at Belden Elementary School, and Barbara Oehlberg. Our moderator today is Dr. Mittie Davis Jones, associate professor at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. We encourage you to formulate questions for our speakers now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point, and actually questions. Be sure to tune into our Friday Forums live broadcast on 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many other radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Today's program is part of the Education Innovation Series, sponsored by a generous grant from the Nordson Corporation. We thank you for your support. We'd also like to welcome guests at a table hosted by Cleveland State University. Thank you all for coming and for your support. On Friday, January 30th, the City Club will host a panel discussion on the state of cancer care in Northeast Ohio with members of the Case Comprehensive Cancer Center. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Now it's time for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including our guests, and holding the microphone today is our content associate, Teddy Eisenberg. We can start with the first question.
Thank you very much. Your discussion focuses mostly on elementary school children. But it would seem to me that the biggest effect, if you're talking about something that starts with attachment issues, would be with the preschool. And what I would hope there would be is something that would be as basic as possible of a how-to that could go to preschool teachers. Is there such a thing? Could you address the possibilities?
There is a how-to.
There is a how-to, and there are 4 copies of the revised version of my first book 20 years ago on called Making It Better, Creative Healing Activities for Children Living in a Stressful World, with lots of activities that you can engage children in that help them connect the autonomic nervous system with the trauma that's embedded in the amygdala in the limbic system so that they can release it. They need a sensory activity, movement of the hands. And so there are lots of activities there. And the hope is that if you start with a change in assuring children that they have an emotionally secure environment, emotionally secure, in addition to physically, that they will not be threatened, they will not be shamed in front of peers, that builds from year to year to year. And by the time they are in high school, trauma-informed education is a terrific way to reduce violence and aggression in our society. But that's a topic for another day. But we have the information now, let's get it out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. In my classroom, I always had a sign on the bulletin board that said hate-free zone. And just that in itself, students would point to it. If somebody said something, they say, hate-free zone. And it just really creates an environment, as Barbara said, where children will feel safe. And this book has wonderful activities that you can apply to preschool. Just to give you an example, with issues of rejection or being excluded, a writing topic or a discussion topic for a little one could be, discuss a dog that was rejected by a neighborhood pack of dogs he wants to join. You know, or an abandoned house that is occupied by broken dreams. What does it take to make itself inviting when a young family walks down the street looking for a home? Just really good topics that are fun topics, but that will really have a very deeper purpose without the child really knowing that's why they're writing about it. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that these are out there, and this book, once I got it, it became my Bible in the classroom because it was just wonderful.
It's really for 4th through 8th grade because it involves more writing, but
the creative teachers can use it for younger grades.
Yeah, right. And the activities have to be symbolic, not directed toward what the teacher may know the child has experienced, because that re-traumatizes the child. Yeah. So it has to be, for small children especially, anything related to a little animal. I mean, there's nothing in the world less powerful than a small, the lonely kitten, the wet dog, whatever. And children use that in order to express their internal needs that they could not put into words, because they cannot put this stuff into words. Okay.
During our training, you used, I believe it was some of Becky Bailey's tapes.
Yes.
And taught our teachers some of the songs, and they had motions.
Creative
and
activity.
Jonathan smiling. So now I remember that our 4th grade teachers actually, she taught the kids some of those songs, and they went down to the kindergarten classes and the preschool classes and did that. And it was providing the healing that the 4th grade kids needed. They didn't know, but also engaging and connecting things for our littlest learners in the building.
That's great.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What changes do you imagine or envision for pre-service teachers, or what advice would you give to universities?
And could you, what advice would you give to universities? And could you add to that why you've encountered such resistance to incorporating this in curriculum?
Asking teachers to, and I am one, okay? Asking teachers to change is a very tough situation. And that's why Mallory offered her program on a volunteer basis. We could not impose it. And there still were teachers who felt we were coddling the misbehaving children. So we didn't reach them all, but we did reach a good number of them. And the programs on a college level would be some of the works that are like Cozzolini's new book, Attachment-Based Teaching. He has it all laid out. It's not technical, but it's humanly.
It's customer friendly.
It's almost spiritually friendly, because you connect with the children. What they need is relationships, because many of these children have not had the opportunity to have them. And so building that grows the brain. It strengthens the self-regulation. If they understand why children are misbehaving, then you can design strategies to prevent it. If you're working on the concept that many of us grew up with, that if you misbehaved, you needed to be punished, well, then we don't grow the brain, and we don't boost achievement. Okay.
Well, first I'd like to ask Cozzolini, is that Q-U-R-K?
K, it's, we handed out some articles for you.
It should be in there?
Two references are at the very bottom. He's had other books, but the two that are related to teaching is attachment-based teaching, and then the other one is the social neuroscience of education.
Thank you.
Okay?
And what I would like to know is, I'm a family liaison for elementary school, K through 5. And I work really hard in trying to keep the mindset as you that there are no bad children, there are bad circumstances, and situations. Can you give any further suggestions on how to redirect, direct, or encourage the staff? Because, you know, our teachers can become set in their ways. This has not been working. It just hasn't worked the best it could, so why should I change? How can I help to encourage them or give them ideas, other than that you've already expressed, on how to change in managing behavioral problems, especially of the child who daily throws themselves in the floor, daily has a tantrum, almost regresses back to infantile stages.
Because he's insecure.
And
Yes.
daily, the teacher has reacted in that classroom and it hasn't worked.
Yes.
Correct.
So you almost have to meet them when they're at that point of frustration and model for them and encourage them to do different. Because really, what do they have to lose other than seeing the same thing over and over and over?
And if you model, because I've attempted to do so, when they say, then it's you, see, that works for you, they don't do that for me.
I think that's where the research comes in, and it's very important, and it has to start with the principal. If you're really going to have a successful system within your school, you need principal buy-in first. Going to individual teachers and saying, do we do this, fine, but if the principal understands the research, then the principal can be the one that sets up the professional development so that, and within, I know within Cleveland schools, there are hours built in now for professional development. So then you have all of the teachers there and family liaisons receiving the same kind of professional development. But it's really important, I think, to have principal buy-in and then go that direction. And the research is there. Barbara has given you the names of books. This book is really good, and but I just think that principal buy-in is real important.
And the other piece I would piggyback on is the relationship, because I've worked from pre-K all the way to 12th grade, and when you have that relationship with the child will do what you're asking them to do.
Yeah, that's key.
I actually have something to kind of connect your question and your question together. Going through college, I found I was often getting frustrated by my textbooks on methods. Here's a grand reading method that you can implement into your classroom, and the discussion would always come back when we were student teaching is, well, this works well in the book, or this works well for you but not for my situation. And I think a lot of times what happens in the college level is we get a textbook from either some theorist or somebody who's put a program together, and when they talk about relationships, like if you find that you're in a classroom that is struggling to implement this program, take some more time to build the relationships. That's it.
Yes.
That's all they leave you with, just build the relationships. Well, being honest with myself, I came from a small town suburb going into Canton City. That was culture shock for me, and I didn't know how to build those relationships because I didn't really know how to connect with those students. But I was lucky enough to have a couple mentor teachers in the building to show me, Mr. Shaw, this is how you have to be with these kids, because my mentor teachers were teachers that lived in the district, that lived in that neighborhood, that knew all those families. And so I was able to find somebody that could model what the book was telling me to do, but really gave me no step-by-step or real good direction to implement it.
I guess I came here today thinking I was going to hear something about really an intervention or a technique that could be used with specific students or specific groups of students, but what I'm hearing sounds more like good teaching.
Prevention.
Yeah, good teaching.
Prevention.
She says good teaching.
It sounds like good teaching and good classroom management. So I guess I'm just asking, are we talking here about systems that are used to work with students and classes in general, or systems that are used to work with specific students or specific classes? Can you identify that?
It has to be throughout the school, even the volunteers in the school, even the playground monitors, because a student who gets excited or challenged and threatened in the playground is going to be lost for either until lunchtime or for the whole day. It involves everybody in the school owning and practicing the same philosophy.
And when you think about it, trauma-informed education is good for all the students. You know, the number one thing, building relationships. One of the ways that I worked to build relationships in my classroom is I did something every single morning after the journal writing called Good Thing, Bad Thing, Funny Thing. And the students could volunteer and share something good that happened in their life within that last week, something bad or something funny. And through that little activity, I found out that a young man, his little brother, 6-month-old brother, was having heart surgery. And he eventually passed. And the young man felt comfortable enough, because of us having those discussions every day, to let us know that he had passed, and I was able to go to the funeral. But you know, building relationships is not complicated. It's just leaving time to actually get to know the students and allow them to get to know you. Now, one thing that's really, that needs to be mentioned, because I know my teacher colleagues are going to be upset if I don't mention it, is that with the overwhelming activities and responsibilities that are being placed on teachers now as a result of legislation and as a result of district rules, it's becoming harder and harder for teachers to develop relationships with their students because they don't have the time. And so it seems that all the stuff that's good for the children who do bring trauma to the classroom, being able to know they can achieve through art and music and so forth, being able to feel safe, but yet we have huge class sizes where students don't feel safe. We're going backwards instead of creating environments for our children where they can be successful. I had to say that because it's really, we're not moving in a direction that we need to for our children.
Can I add, I was going to mention it in my presentation, but I was also watching the clock and I decided to cut it off. But I feel that informing children about their marvelous brain is very, very helpful to them. Most children have absolutely no idea why, when they perceive a threat, they have this sudden explosive action. They're as shocked as the teachers who watch them, but they don't know why. And if you introduce them to what's called the brain in your hand. Anybody ever read Dan Siegel's work? The brain in your hand. Your arm is the backbone, the wrist is the brain stem, fully functioning at birth, can never be changed because it monitors heart and blood pressure and all that. The base of the hand, according to Bruce Perry, is the center for safety and security. The inside of the hand, the upper hand, including the thumb, is a center for the limbic system. And in the limbic system we have 2 amygdalas. And kids love the word amygdala because it's so different. It rolls off your tongue so differently. The amygdala is the Greek word for almond because we have an amygdala on the left and the right side, and they're about the size and shape of an almond. And the amygdala stores all the memories of terror and rejection. And the job of the amygdala is to keep you safe. It is always on the alert for something that could potentially be a threat to you or insecurity. Now, we don't want kids to ignore that, but neither do we want the amygdala to make the decision of when I'm going to fight. We want them to do that in their thinking brain, which are the neocortex. They have to be in the neocortex to make a problem-solving decision. And the kids, then we talked about how do you calm the amygdala. And I have all that on a sheet down here if some of you want it. I used sports characters because that's one way to really get at least from the 3rd and 4th grade up. In spring, when I did this in the classroom, baseball was just starting. What do baseball batters do between each bat? Almost all of them. What do you see them do? They open and close the Velcro on their batting glove. It's a ritual. It's a ritual that tells them I'm in charge of this bat, and I'm going to make the best bat in the world because I'm strong and safe. Now, how can a child calm their amygdala? And in the class, we decided if they squeeze their thumb, because the thumb represents the amygdala, nobody will notice it. You don't want them to say, put your hands in your pocket, because that could have a very disastrous result. But squeezing the thumb is just enough to give them 10 seconds to check with their thinking brain, am I at risk? Because most of those kids had already been sent to the office for an altercation on the playground or in the hall or on the bus, and they had no idea why they'd done it. Mm-hmm. Also, they didn't understand why adults in their lives had sudden emotional reactions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Give them this information. It's very helpful. When I would see them in the hall, they would raise their arms and yell out, amygdala, amygdala. So I knew I reached them.
Okay, we have one more question, I think. Good afternoon.
Maria Robinson. I attend St. Martin de Porres High School as a senior. And I have decided to start a Big Brother, Big Sister mentoring program at a charter school. It's an elementary school in urban Cleveland. Okay. And I noticed that their school culture is a little negative as far as some of the teaching staff. A lot of the teachers, I researched the method of being burned out, where they've been maybe multiple times possibly disrespected, or they aren't able to cope or deal with students who have been through trauma. Yes. And I was wondering that if I try my best to implement certain methods of how they're able to cope, if these methods aren't being implemented at home, how could I, to the best of my ability, possibly change their behavior in a more positive way?
You have to take a lot of time. But also, don't worry about the fact that they may be living in a totally different environment. Who among us, even as children, took vacations with our parents to a very, very nice place, but we were always glad to get back home, okay? So don't be afraid of offering them a window of opportunity to another way of dealing with things. Children really attach themselves to hope, because hope is very important in their lives. Mm-hmm. And the same is true for teachers. If teachers implement relationships, they will find they have far less problems with these behavioral outbreaks because the children feel safe. Mm-hmm. But they have to experience that themselves. And one thing we found at Belden, the teachers who were using the program were the best salespeople for the rest of the staff. And had we been able to keep it going for a couple more years, I think we'd have eventually had almost everybody. But we didn't but we still increased achievement tremendously with half the staff. Thank you.
Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a panel discussion on boosting the achievement of anxious students, featuring Mallory Floyd, Meryl Johnson, Barbara Oehlberg, and Jonathan Shaw. Our moderator today was Dr. Mittie Davis Jones. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.